And as expected, of course, the politics taking center stage, especially over the weekend, and a lot happening. And joining me to have that conversation and looking at what is happening in the country is Dismas Mokua, who is a political analyst and also an economic analyst. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Good afternoon, and karibu sana.
Thank you very much.
Let's start with Mombasa. There seems to be growing interest for the gubernatorial seat. We do know that Ali Hassan Joho is going to be defending his seat. We also have Omar Hassan, who is also eyeing it. Now we have him coming in. So your take on why the interest in Mombasa?
Well, you know, Mombasa is a very important city, given that it's the second capital city in Kenya, and every political formation would like to be in charge. But unfortunately for Mombasa, the person who is going to be the governor is actually not going to be determined by the residents in Mombasa. It's going to be determined by the national political leaders. Like, for instance, for the case of NASA, it's going to be determined by Mr. Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka, Musalia Mudavadi.
What makes you think so? I would imagine they are going to have nominations, and who is going to literally be nominated to go for the seat?
Well, NASA will have many options. The three principals, or rather the four principals, can sit somewhere in a room in Nairobi and agree whether it's going to be Joe, whether it's going to be Omari or Hassan Awiti. And if they don't do that, if they allow the various political parties to field candidates, then Shakil Shabal will have an upper hand almost immediately. So they have to sit down and agree that between Hassan Omar, Awiti, and Joe, who stands a very strong chance. And my guess is that Mr. Raila Odinga is likely to prevail upon them to support Joe, because NASA considers Joe to be a very serious asset. If you look at his history, the last couple of days, the way he's been taking on the deputy president, that's the kind of resource I would imagine NASA would need from Mombasa to keep on taking Jubilee. Hassan Omar comes up as a public intellectual, and at some stages accused of not relating with the voters within the constituency. But again, I would imagine that's the kind of brain you may need at the Senate instead of the county administration. But it still now boils to the party leaders and how those candidates can actually present their case.
Okay, so would you have anybody you put your money on?
Well, you know, in Kenya, unfortunately, all the political parties we are talking about here, those are special purpose vehicles. They are controlled by the various political party leaders. So it's up to Raila, Kalonzo, Wetangula, and Mudavadi to sit down and agree on.
Yeah. Regardless of what Joho's track record might be so far?
Well, if you look at the governors today, you'll be very disappointed if you're looking for a track record. There's nobody who actually stands out and says that from the time I took office for the last 4 years, I've done things which are very... No. Governor Mokua is a student of communication. For him, it's all seize or no stake. If you go to Machakos today and you want to touch and feel the projects that Governor Mokua keeps on talking about, you'll be very disappointed. You'll be very shocked. There's nothing at the ground. It's only that he has mastered the art of marketing and communication. When he does a very single event, he blows out air. If Governor Mokua was a solid leader, there would be no medical strike in Machakos today. He would have offered a solution. So all the things he talks about...
One might say that is national, but even to be fair, you've got the Machakos Park that everybody talks about. He's managed to pull in certain events to actually be done in Machakos, which had not been done before. We do know that Machakos town has got CCTV. Whether it works or not, of course, that's debatable, but that has been done. There's an initiative. We've got all those ambulances. Are you saying all that's PR?
Mike, when we got a new constitution, we said there was going to be public participation. And when you're coming up with any projects, you must be able to sit with your voters and come up with a priority list. These are the issues we need sorted out. Like, for instance, in Machakos, would you actually say that CCTV is very high in the priority list?
Well, you'd say security is a high priority, and maybe CCTV comes under security.
And security is a national government function. When we are fighting for resources and you get your small allocation from the national government, are you supposed to be diving into functions which are supposed to be offered by the national government instead of using these resources for actually the needs that the people of Machakos need? Because you don't have unlimited budget. There's already a budget which has been provided to the national government to offer security. And you've got limited resources for food security within the county, sorting out medical issues and stuff like that. And I think all the governors who are assisting the national government offer security in their counties, that is a lapse in their decision-making process. Because that responsibility is domiciled within the national government. It's not as if you've done everything that your county needed to be done, and then you've got an extra resource, then you say, okay, I'm going to use this one for national functions. elections.
So from your analysis, you'd say there's no governor who stands out to have done anything that is worth mentioning?
Well, the governor stand out on issues of impunity, mediocrity, and corruption. That's when you will be lost for choice. There'll be so many. But right now, if you go to any county today and you want to have a conversation with the residents on a very serious note, looking at the priority listing, that what have they done which makes you happy? Like, for instance, if you go all over town buying ambulances and then the next day all of them are broken down, they're not able to function,
or doctors on strike and they cannot
how does that benefit here? And you see, that corruption has also been perpetuated from the national government. Like, for instance, when the national government decided to buy medical equipment, which was forced upon the county governors, the governors were not requested to give a view, because when you're buying medical equipment, it's supposed to be responding to a particular need. Like, for instance, the need, say, in Kisii and Mandela and Moyale would be entirely different. Let the people, the leadership, decide. Like, for instance, in Kisii, if you're going to buy medical equipment, you're supposed to be addressing, say, malaria. You're not supposed to be addressing all these kind of things. Like now, when you buy a lot of equipment for treating cancer, and yet you don't have experts. Because I understand from records, Kenya has got less than 20 oncologists, and all of them are residents and they work in Nairobi. So why would you want every county facility to have cancer treatment facilities, yet there's nobody to operate those machines? The technicians there, all they do every day in the morning is just to go and dust them. Why wouldn't the government, the national government, sit with the county governments and agree that we have some resources to buy cancer facilities? Can we establish, say, 4 regional centers? And then as a nation, we share that.
Well, one might argue and say it's a case of a chicken and the egg, because even if you had doctors there and they don't have the facilities, you end up with a strike that we have, because part of their argument is that they're being asked to do a job that they are not equipped to do. But let's leave that aside. Let's look at Eldoret and what's happening in Eldoret. And we have NASA having their first rally after signing their power sharing deal. And why Eldoret, given that especially it's not one of their strongholds, or rather it is not viewed as one of their strongholds, that's debatable. Why Eldoret, do you think?
Actually, you cannot say that Eldoret is a stronghold, a NASA one, because the Jubilee got more than 2/3 of the votes. And I think when you look at the analysts from the various political divides, they are claiming that some counties are battlegrounds, and I think the universal definition is that if you got more than 2/3, then that becomes a safe zone. So Eldoret is right in the space of Jubilee, and it's unlikely, I mean, whatever NASA wants to do, it's unlikely that they'll get 1/3 of the votes. But one would imagine the reason why they've decided to zoom into Eldoret is because of the Deputy President Ruto. Because I think NASA claims that in their strongholds, they are now safe and secure, and they want to go around. And the key persons who are driving the agenda today include people who are born and brought up in Rift Valley. That's Kipruto Arap Kirwa, who's been given the responsibility to go and get votes, especially from the Kalenjin community. And it's also not lost on observers that a few days ago, the chairman of KANU, Gideon Moi, has decided to join Jubilee, or rather, work with President Kenyatta.
Is it Gideon Moi or is it KANU?
Well, again, you know, Mike, you know, we don't have political parties in Kenya. Gideon is KANU, and KANU is Gideon. Okay. So Gideon has taken a decision to work with President Moi, or rather, to work with President Kenyatta. And that has brought a lot of confusion within Rift Valley Jubilee. Because the Deputy President obviously is unhappy and is disappointed that Gideon Moi has come on board. And you recall, unlike NASA, which is a coalition of the so-called political parties, which are special purpose vehicles, because you know the memorandum and the articles they've signed on behalf of the political parties. And it seems to me that Jubilee now is a coalition of individuals, 3 very strong individuals. And NASA and Gideon Moi have got the same objective for the first time. All of them want to eat into a territory which had been controlled by the Deputy President Ruto. So for them to have a rally in Eldoret today, they're trying to get some votes. And it's the same thing that Gideon Moi would be doing. And when you look at the way the Deputy President has managed his politics, for some reason, he's been able to create so many political enemies than friends. And all the people who've been disappointed with the way he's been managing Jubilee, especially in Rift Valley, now they've got a home either in KANU, if they want to be directly aligned to President Kenyatta, or they can now go to Chama cha Mashinani if they want to be aligned to the opposition. And I see that the Deputy President is going to have challenging times in future, because now you have NASA coming into your zone, and you have Gideon Moi coming into your zone. So that is going to be a very complicated process
Maybe
for him.
staying with KANU Jubilee relationship, which seems to be a little bit dicey, given that come 2022, Gideon Moi might be eyeing the presidential seat, whereas, of course, there is a pact that Jubilee has with the deputy president to stand with him. Do you think that is likely to complicate their relationship going forward?
Obviously, it's going to complicate relationships. That's why when Gideon Moi declared his interest in working with President Kenyatta, it's created a lot of friction and complicated the ball game for Ruto. And it's observers indicate that Ruto actually wanted a Jubilee, so that he can use it as a special purpose vehicle for this year, but more important, in preparation for 2022. Yeah. But when Gideon Moi comes in, who has also similar ambitions and a lot of resources, and has got unlimited relationship with President Kenyatta, it complicates the situation for him. And many observers consider Ruto an outsider. And you have to give Ruto a pat on the back, because coming from Eldoret North, where he says he was born and brought up, selling chicken, he's been able to amass so much political capital that he sits at the top of the leadership level in Kenya. And that makes President Kenyatta uncomfortable. It makes Gideon Moi uncomfortable. Because, the two are born into royalty. For them, running the nation, it's as if it's a birthright. And when they see Ruto crawling from the woodwork and coming on board, it makes them very nervous because they don't have his political history. That's why it's very easy for Gideon Moi to have a meal, pepper steak or single malt whiskey with President Kenyatta, and they're comfortable. They've known each other from the time they were little kids. So there's no complication, but they cannot trust the deputy president because he just comes to the party and he wants to upset everything. So it's going to be very interesting to see whether Gideon Moi is actually going to deploy so much resource in Rift Valley to see whether they can actually get a number of governors, whether they can get a number of MPs. And you never know the kind of pact he has entered with President Kenyatta. He may as well get into the cabinet, or he could actually have the opportunity to appoint some people in the cabinet. And when you see Mama Ngina Kenyatta having a meeting,
involved.
Yeah, when you see Mama Ngina Kenyatta having a meeting with retired President Moi, and then when you see President Kenyatta having a meeting with President Moi, it's not something that you can just wish away. It's not an accident. Because in these political conversations, there's not a single accident that ever takes place.
It's all schemed and planned. All right, let's come back to NASA and the fact that now they're in Eldoret and their next stop apparently might be Meru. What are they likely to sell? They gave their 7-point guide to what their government should look like and should aspire to do. But do you think that's something that Kenyans are likely to buy into?
Now, NASA in marketing terms, NASA's got a very good product, but poorly branded, and they don't even know how to sell it. Because when you look at the 9 points, even if they achieve only one, yeah, if you look at the 7 points, even if they only achieve one, Kenya will be a great republic. Like, for instance, they say one of their commitments that nobody in the government will be allowed to do business with government. The situation we're having today is that family and friends, people said to be associated with the president and his deputy, are the principal suppliers to the Kenyan government. You remember the accusations around Afia House that the president's sister was considered to be marginalized, that now she got a contract. And part of the reason why Kenya can never ever grow and achieve our potential is because the public servants do business with the government. It's some sort of incest. In countries, serious democracies like, say, the UK, the US, Singapore, South Korea, the public service and the public servants do not do business with government at all. They wake up in the morning, they go and serve the nation. At 5 o'clock, they go home. But the contradiction in Kenya is just amazing. Like, for instance, part of the reason why the cost of roads in Kenya is so high, it's because the engineers are the ones who have created a lot of companies that the contractors to the government of Kenya. So they just sit on a round table and agree on the pricing. So if NASA is able to achieve that, then we'll make very good progress. But again, in as much as they've given out the 7-point agenda, one is not very sure whether they're actually different from the Jubilee administration. They need to really convince the nation that they mean what they're saying.
And of course, there's a question. I mean, if you look at things to do, let's say, for instance, they have said they'll deal decisively with corruption. Yet, when we sample through some of the code county governments, there has not been much mention or even distancing themselves from those governors who've been mentioned in corruption. We've not seen the same, vim, vigor, and vitality as they would with the government. Would we trust that they would be able to deliver on this?
Now, I get that is a very complicated ballgame, because I recall at some stage Raila Odinga was cornered, and the question was posed to him that you got your ODM governors who are accused of corruption, and wherever somebody mentions the name of Joe or King, you run down to Mombasa and protect them. And his answer was simple and very basic. He said it does not control the government agencies responsible for investigating corruption. So we go back to the institutions like the Anti-Corruption Commission. Are they actually serious in the war against corruption? And one would imagine that if the Anti-Corruption Commission was working, if there's any governor who has stolen resources, there must be serious investigations, and the people, there must be consequence for all this man of mischief. But again, we are told today that the Anti-Corruption Commission has become like a PR agency. You walk in the morning with allegations of corruption, in the evening you walk out, you go break into a dance.
But given that these institutions have been set up within the Constitution, even if NASA took over government, what is it that they would do differently, do you think, to ensure that these institutions actually work? Yes, they may not have control over national resources and some of those institutions, but when there is corruption, you certainly can distance yourself.
What we must do as an institution is to empower the Anti-Corruption Commission and make sure that they are not going to be held hostage by cartels in Kenya. Because it's cartels in Kenya that determine who is going to head the Anti-Corruption Commission. And when a case is being investigated, they determine the direction and path. So we must have a very strong organization. And then the Anti-Corruption Commission must have qualified staff. It's very disappointing. Like, for instance, they present a case and saying the Auditor General must be investigated, or that is guilty, he must be accused for some violations, abuse of public office. But when the same file gets to Keriako Tobiko, he says there's nothing here. The Auditor General has not done anything. So the question is this a deliberate effort to ensure that these commissions, like the Anti-Corruption Commission, does not have qualified personnel? Most of the issues that the Anti-Corruption Commission is supposed to be fighting over or investigating are financial crimes. Do they have forensic accountants? Do they have accountants who can actually go through the books and establish resources that have been stolen? Do they have forensic lawyers, or do they just rely on what Oku has presented? So there is the issue of capacity building and giving them a lot of resources, and making sure that if the commission doesn't deliver, somebody is held responsible. Because we've seen so many heads of the Anti-Corruption Commission, they come, they dance, they do media conferences, but at the end of the day, there's nothing to write home.
All right, now let's come back to NASA and the fact that they launched their 7-point guide and, their pact and how they're going to share power. First of all, was that almost like an anticlimax, given the hype that had been built around the actual announcement that they were going to make? Was there anything different announced?
Well, there was nothing to write home, because the 7 issues they were talking about, a man on the street knows that those are the issues that are affecting Kenya. And for some reason, Kenya, we are so fixated with personalities that we just wanted to know who is the flag bearer for NASA. But for the core NASA supporters, they were very delighted to see that those 4 principles are actually together, and they're creating some sort of institutional framework. If you look at that agreement into detail, it binds them together as institutions. That today, if Raila Odinga wanted to walk out of NASA, he may find himself walking alone. And the same will happen with the other 3 principles. But I think now the next level is for them to breathe life into that, into the articles or the framework they signed, and have Wanjiko's interest. Because one of the missing things out of those 7 points is Wanjiko. Nobody talks about wealth creation for Wanjiko. It's as if when they were coming up with those articles, they did not have Wanjiko in mind. And that's something they must tell us, that in as much as you want to have a very strong public service, but how does that affect Wanjiko or Anyango in the
might
streets?
argue, they've said that they're going to strengthen devolution, and that is really just bringing resources to the Mwananchi who should benefit from that.
No, but Mike, if you take a lot more resources to the counties, like for instance, it's very disappointing that the MCAs in Kisii are passing a bill suggesting that any governor should be given a lump sum of 10 million, and then every month you are giving them $500,000. So even if NASA gives devolution more resources, we don't want these resources to end
up in people's pockets.
Yeah, to end up in people's pockets. Yeah, we just want to be told that this is how we are going to turn around the economy. Like for instance, do you think there is any rational leader in the world who would have medical doctors on strike for 3 months. You have even morticians right now on strike. You have university teachers on strike. Is there a leadership which would allow that kind of thing? No. Now, these guys in NASA must tell us that we are actually a very good alternative government and we will be able to deliver for the nation. And I think that's why they're failing in their messaging. Because for a typical middle-class person in Nairobi who's got a mortgage, struggling to pay that mortgage on a monthly basis, you want the government to to tell you that when we take over, we are going to work on the economy so much that you will have a lot more disposable income. But nobody seems to be talking about that. All of them are dancing around the issues, and they're telling us that we're going to kick Jubilee out of office, but they're not telling us what they'll do after they kick out Jubilee. Although they're running with a funny narrative that anybody among the 4 principals would do a better job compared to what Jubilee is doing today. But Kenyans don't just want to be told, figures from the sky. We want to see action numbers. Like, for instance, what are you going to do? Jubilee promised us they were going to give us 500,000 jobs on an annual basis. And
that's
give them credit.
It's measurable.
Yeah, give them credit that they've done that. But how do you address the issue that most of the companies at the Nairobi Stock Exchange, they're giving profit warnings? You've got so many companies closing shop in Kenya, going to South Africa, others even going to what you consider to be a smaller economy like Rwanda. We just need to be told that if we take office, this is what we are going to be doing. And even Jubilee should be telling us today that over the last 4 years, we made very good progress. We made a number of mistakes. We've learned. Now, if you give us another term, these are we intend to address the issue. Because really, at the end of the day, Mike, a government in office or an administration is supposed to create opportunities for all and sundry. You're not creating opportunities for only your family and friends. You create opportunities for the entire nation. It would be so interesting if, say, through the NASA administration, you've got a shoe shiner on Kimathi Street who is able to make sufficient resources even to get a mortgage, to go and put up a house somewhere in Buruburu and start paying. Because it happens in other parts of the world, that if you're working between 8 and 5, you're able to get some resources. You're able to take your kids to good school, you're able to access Medicare, and you generally lead a very good life. Right now, as we speak, about 70% of Kenyans cannot afford food. They're sleeping on empty stomachs, and nobody is bothered. NASA is not bothered, Jubilee is not bothered. And I think we're in a very bad space.
All right. Now, the presidential flag bearer for NASA, do you think it's a strategy that they have so far, that they've kept it under wraps? Or maybe it's a thorny issue that they themselves have not quite thrashed out?
When you look at those principles, and you can take this to a very good bank, they don't like each other. They've just been forced by circumstances
to be together.
They're in a very unhealthy relationship. Some of them are infected with various diseases, but they have to keep together.
For the sake of kicking Jubilee out.
It's not even Jubilee that they're worried of. They're worried of the Deputy President Ruto, because they know that if Jubilee wins in August, then Ruto will be running the nation for the next 15 years. That's their principal worry. And the reason why they're not in a rush to give out a name, and you realize the people who are actually worried, it's not even the NASA supporters, it's not even the NASA leadership, it's the Deputy President Ruto. He's the one who keeps on running around saying, these guys, they don't know who's going to be the candidate. And even for him, when they were forming the Jubilee coalition with President Kenyatta before the last election, nobody knew who was going to be the candidate, still very late in the day. Even during the NAC in 2002, nobody knew who was going to be the NAC candidate. In fact, Moi Kibaki's name came up about 3 months to the election. So one would understand why Jubilee is very nervous, because they'd like to know if it's going to be Raila Odinga. Then they work on a propaganda system, tell people in central Kenya that if Raila becomes president, he's going to nationalize your assets. You recall Waititu, the MP from Kiambu, saying that if Raila becomes a president, you'll start walking around in shorts, that Raila is going to come and sell your cows. So they would be very happy to know who is the candidate right now, very early in the day.
So they can attack.
So that they can attack him, they can tear their brand into pieces. And if I was a strategist for NASA, I'll tell them to keep the name till the last minute. Because every Kenyan knows that if NASA doesn't give us a shock, and NASA may give us a shock, they may even get a name outside the 4 principles. They may just decide to get a name from elsewhere. But assuming they're going to do things in a conventional manner, we know for a fact that it's going to be one of those 4 principles. And every of those principles has got a national brand recognition.
All right, I'll have to cut you short. Thank you very much, Dismas Mokua. Would like to now cross over live to what's happening at the University of Nairobi. And this is the Catholic bishops who've gathered on a mission to have peace. And the president is currently speaking. So from us here at Weekend at 1, we'll say goodbye. And we want to cross over live now and listen in to what the president is saying. He's currently the one on his feet addressing.